Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health is a not-for-profit group of hospitals and medical clinics caring for surrounding communities. Their nurses, physicians, and staff are nationally recognized for their remarkable devotion to patient care. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Wow, the year that was in 2011. We saw the Arab Spring blossom. We witnessed another royal wedding, the end of bin Laden and Gaddafi, the end of the Iraq War. We observed the last space shuttle touching down. And through it all, experienced deepening political partisanism. We watched the U.S. economy grow, but not without dramatic fits and starts. And speaking of drama, the European opera pitch increased as Greece and Italy's fiscal sins threatened to spread. Welcome once again, and thanks for supporting the most widely watched conversation on Carolina business and public policy, from healthcare, public policy, education, real estate, to economic development. I'm Chris William, and this time our annual look back and peek forward on the state of things in our region.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte, enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, who's responsible for rising healthcare costs. Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded December 16, 2011. On this week's program, Scott Baier of Clemson University, Dr. John Connaughton of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, Dr. Harry Davis of Appalachian State University, and Dr. Frank Hefner of the College of Charleston. Now, Chris William.
Hello, welcome again to our program. Happy holidays, Happy New Year, guys. Welcome. Good to have you all back. This is, by the way, this is my favorite program of the year. You know, I'm not supposed to show favorites, but this is my favorite. So that means that you guys need to mix it up here a little bit. You need to be a little opinionated, which I know some of you, all of you can be, but welcome. Good to have you here. John, I'm going to start with you. What do you think was the story when it came to business and public policy for last year?
I think it was basically the economic, I would say, collapse, if you will, in 2011. The fact that the economy did basically nothing. 2010 wasn't a bad year. GDP grew pretty close to 3%, and you know. But 2011, we almost didn't grow at all. Just very modest growth for 2011. I think that's the big story. The recovery just lost steam, and you can see it with the job numbers, and they just didn't pan out. We're still 6 million jobs from getting back the jobs that we lost in the recession, and it's a long way to go. And hopefully 2012 will be better, but 2011 was a really bad year.
Scott, do you agree with that assessment? And do you think that we were close to slipping into another recession?
I think that the top story, again, was the persistently high unemployment. I think we were close to looking as if we were going to head into a recession, but in the last part of the year, the fourth quarter, it seems to be the indicators are quite good now, that some of the projections are for about 3.5% to 4% GDP growth in the fourth quarter, yet we still have this persistently high unemployment rate.
Yeah, okay, Harry, let's just keep going down the line here then. If that's the case, and have we gotten most of the bad news behind us? Are we going to see a turn, or is this just protracted?
Well, I think it's like in a bathtub. We're bouncing along the bottom. We can't get the unemployment rate to go down. It's high at the national level in any post-war sense at all. Economic growth is stagnant. I mean, we're growing at 1/3 the rate of the post-World War II average. So talking about GDP growth, employment growth, same way. Europe is trying to go back into another recession, Southern Europe certainly. That'll slow down growth in the United States further. And remember, we're doing this after the stimulus package, after the Fed has thrown everything it can at the economy. In spite of all the fiscal stimulus and monetary stimulus, the economy is still growing the last 12 months at 1.5%. I think the thing that America's got to deal with is the deficits that we are piling up. I think they create uncertainty in the business world, Businesses are sitting on the biggest cash in 50 years, $2 trillion. They will not invest it in plant and equipment and workers. We've got to get this uncertainty out of the way, and one way we're going to have to do that is to deal with the deficits we're piling up.
You know, and I want to come back to that, how we get out of that. Before we do that, Frank, do you have a different point of view on this?
Oh, just remember Osawatomie. And being a Kansas graduate, what does that mean? Well, I think what's happening is the biggest story, I think, this year is the political gridlock, the lack of consensus, and the major uncertainties, and everyone else has touched on that, what that has brought into the table for business and created policy uncertainty, and then regulatory uncertainty, and then added to it the costs of all of that. And I only bring up Osawatomie because that's where Teddy Roosevelt did his progressive speech, and Obama did a takeoff on that, which is fine. But he also kind of copied Franklin Roosevelt's massive attack on business in the 30s, which was so devastating that even Keynes from England told Roosevelt, you should stop doing this. Either quit attacking them or nationalize them. This just won't work.
You know, would you bring up a good point? Do we even at this point, beginning of a new year, here we are, we got an economy, John, to your point, that really has grown, but it's arguable which way. Have we underestimated what the lack of political leadership? Last summer, we ran up against a Congress that couldn't come to an agreement, and they went past the debt ceiling, and U.S. Treasury's downgraded. We have the super committee that failed. Have we underestimated, John, the impact on the cultural psyche of what that leadership in Washington means?
Well, I think we should be clear. I don't think politics can lead us out of this, but I think they can slow us down and put an anchor around any kind of growth that we might have. And I think that's what they've been doing here. I mean, it goes to more than just the political discourse that's taking place and their inability to act on simple things like a debt ceiling and continuing the 2% Social Security tax rebate. It goes further than that. I mean, all the rules and regulations that we know are coming, but we haven't seen the final product yet, and we haven't seen them in action because they really don't take place until 2012, Dodd-Frank in particular. And the kind of impact that that's going to have on this recovery. So I don't really look at 2012 as being a whole lot better than the average of 2011. It won't be as bad as the first half of the year where growth was incredibly 0.3% first quarter, 0.8 the second quarter. It won't be that bad, but it's not going to be anything more than 2%.
So what is the tipping point here? Because we have Occupy Wall Street, or take your pick, Occupy any town, and they've been fairly respectable protesters. Is it going to be blood in the streets? Will we get to that point? What's the tipping point? Anyway.
Well, I don't think we'll get blood in the streets, but I'm not too sure about the respectable side that you mentioned. And part of it is when the Occupy Seattle, for example, I think what's happening is there's just, in general, a massive confusion about what's happened. The issues are so complex. The leadership is not there. And so as a result of that, people are grasping for straws. But Occupy Seattle, as part of their occupation strategy, wanted to shut down the port of Seattle. Now, how's that going to help the 99%? That's not the best strategy. And so they're getting their goals and objectives intertwined with some very, very bad ideas on top of it. And so I think that's a big problem for us that we have to deal with.
I want to return to the policy uncertainty real quick. One of the things I think that often goes overlooked in these discussions is that this policy uncertainty is holding back, again, businesses hiring. And usually what happens when the economy takes off and booms, it usually occurs in 1 or 2, 3 sectors, and that bleeds over into the general economy. And I think this political uncertainty has stopped that hiring, stopped the investment, stopped the R&D, so these industries that may have taken off just aren't doing the investments that would have caused it to happen before. So we're going to get this very slow growth until this uncertainty is removed.
And I think we're seeing something this year, right now and for the last couple of years, that we're going to look back on 10 years ago and say we were there when this occurred. And that is, unemployment rate in the United States is at a different plateau from now on. We're becoming more like Europe. Our economy used to add all kinds of jobs in an expansion. Our unemployment rate would go way down. Then in a recession, it would go way up. In Europe, their unemployment rate stays at 8, 9% all the time. It's much different. That's where I think we're moving to.
That's interesting. So you think this is a new natural unemployment rate for
Yes,
the
I do.
U.S.?
I really do, and I think that's a very sad thing. And I really wonder if Americans are going to be able to deal with that. and live
From
with that.
from what standpoint?
Well, I think 8 or 9% unemployment, and when you throw in underemployed and when you throw in people that have quit looking for a job, in this country right now, when you go into the mall, 1 in 5 people is one of those 3 things. 1 in 5. That's amazing.
See, that refers to what we usually call structural unemployment. And Europe has embedded that structural unemployment. It's just an ongoing thing. Stimulus doesn't work in that situation. It's a bigger problem.
But I think,
I'm sorry, we've been there before.
Right.
You know, 3 of us here are old enough to remember the 70s when we had the same kind of situation and persistently high unemployment rates.
He's giving you a compliment, because I know he's not talking about me, or are you?
But we had persistently high unemployment rates back in the 70s,
Sure.
resulting from different causes, but they were persistently high. And in that one, we also had high inflation, and we don't have that now. But I think Harry's right. I think that, you know, this is not going to go away anytime soon. And anybody who thinks that, you know, the silver lining is right around the corner is missing the point. We lost 8.7 million jobs. Half of those were in manufacturing and construction. Those jobs are not coming back. They are permanently, for the most part, not employed. And where we're adding jobs, there's a mismatch in the job set skills. And so that 4 million people who lost their jobs in blue-collar jobs that led to a middle-class income, those are gone.
I'm going to slightly disagree. Most of those manufacturing jobs are not coming back, and the construction jobs aren't coming back until the housing market regains its legs, which isn't going to happen to 2016 or 2017. But I think part of the reason why we have this persistently high unemployment now is some of it is, again, policy-induced. We've extended unemployment benefits much longer than what we've had in any reasonable past time period. We've hiked up the minimum wage at the onset of the recession. Also, I think the housing market, the depressed housing market, has contributed to the elevated unemployment level because people can't afford to have nationwide job searches. It has to be localized because they can't afford to sell their house and move. So I think some of it is structural, but some of it I think will go away once the housing market comes back.
Okay, so Scott, since you talk about the unemployment benefits, can we sustain a 99-week unemployment benefit, and does that send the right message to those who are looking for a job? Keeping in mind, as full disclosure, I have a job, so that's easy for me to say.
I have tenure. So, but the biggest issue is this. The biggest issue is this, though. We know that the longer someone is unemployed, the harder it is to get a job. So something has to happen here. Extending benefits is probably, you know, it's a mixed blessing. Of course they need the help, but on the other hand, it sends a signal that you're going to get the benefits for a long period of time. Europe has done that forever. But the problem you have with that is the longer a person's unemployed, the harder it is for them to find a job. And some of the things that we've seen on the numbers, for example, initial claims dropped this week and everyone got real excited about it. On the other hand, labor force participation rate is at its lowest level in the United States. The number of people who are actively in the labor market providing resources and labor is down. And that's not a good sign for long-term growth in the United States.
What's the difference between unemployed and underemployed?
The difference is the concept of underemployed is either you're not working as many hours as you choose to want to work. Because remember, we define unemployment as you're employed if you work 1 hour for pay in the week of the survey. And there's some other parts of it as well, but that's the critical one. So people could be part-time employed, want full-time employment. They're considered employed, but they're underemployed. And so that's the biggest thing. The second issue is, and it's harder to get a grasp on, and that is that people are working below their skill set. So that someone with a PhD in Egyptology is working as a cab driver. That would also be an example of being underemployed.
But that means we should have a measure of overemployment, but we never think about that.
We want to talk about me right now.
Harry, I want to come back to something. Is this the proverbial antelope going through the python, this Dodd-Frank that's getting ready to be enacted this year, 2012? Is this going to be devastating? And how does it, for banks, financial services firms, and how does it affect you and I, the average person?
Well, the centerpiece of it, one of the centerpieces is the Bureau to Protect Consumers, Financial Consumer Protection Bureau. Well, the Fed has a Financial Protection Bureau within it and always has, and could have protected and stopped teaser rates and negative amortization loans and all that stuff and failed to do so. So now we get Dodd-Frank, which is another layer of regulation. I think they've hired at least 550 people through August. They had hired that many people. These people, it will be their job to sit in a cubicle and come up with regulations for banks. The larger banks will be able to pass that cost on, and they can absorb it and spread it across a big asset base. But for community banks, the bankers that work in the communities across this state and across this country, they cannot pass that cost on. And so it lowers their rate of profitability, lowers their ability to hire new people and to make loans. This will definitely restrict banks' ability to make loans just to cover the cost of the regulations.
So let's just say community banks take the brunt of that, at least feel like they're taking the brunt of it. What happens to those lenders in the communities where they got community banks and you have large banks? What happens to the lending process?
Well, the lending process is going to tend to move toward the larger banks. The smaller banks are going to be at a disadvantage because they can't price the loan right to make a profit, whereas the larger banks will have somewhat of an advantage there. That's going to be the problem.
Anyone have another take on this?
No, Dodd-Frank is a scary piece of legislation.
Any chance it can be repealed or revised or reformed?
It probably will be, but will it be? Remember, 2012 is a critical year in terms of the economy, and this is going to come online in 2012. We already are arguing that banks probably aren't lending enough as it is, and maybe they're justified, maybe they're not justified, but suffice it to say, the banking sector is still crippled from what happened in 2008. And this is just one more kind of punch, one more piling on, if you will. And even if it is reduced a little bit in terms of its impact after the election cycle in November of 2012, it's still going to affect 2012, and that'll be a second year of really modest growth when we could really use a nice 4% growth year. Really be
what
nice.
Everyone forgets is regulations, it's been pointed out before, are not costless. Yeah. This costs the economy. And I think one of the bad messages that got sent out was that the financial collapse wasn't caused by a lack of regulation as much as it was caused by incorrect and improper regulation. So instead of addressing that issue, we piled on more regulation and made it more complex and more difficult.
Well, think about Sarbanes-Oxley. Sarbanes-Oxley is about full disclosure and transparency. So how did MF Global go bankrupt a few weeks ago? Right. How did Wall Street implode in 2007? Sarbanes-Oxley was passed in 2002. The regulations themselves are poorly written. They're not. The administration of them is terrible. I mean, most of the problems I think around those regulations emanate in Washington. They're not helping the business community. They create uncertainty, and that's one of the reasons that hiring is so poor and is going to continue to be poor.
Do you think Occupy Wall Street has it wrong? You think I got your geography wrong?
Let me say this about Occupy Wall Street. I've told numerous groups this. Banks are making very little money now relative to what they made in the 80s and the 90s. Those were great years for them, and up through about 2006. They're not making that kind of money now. Goldman Sachs is losing money. The Occupy Wall Street people are wrong in this sense. They're in the wrong decade. They should have been doing this 20 years ago or 10 years ago. I mean, these people aren't even smart enough to know which decade in which to have the protest. That's pitiful.
We'll make sure you have security when you leave.
Right. and I'm probably going to need it. I understand their complaint about bonuses and things like that, and I'm opposed to those too, and most Americans are opposed to those. But the banking sector of our economy is the poorest performing sector right now. That's not the sector to go after. Yeah. And we can't have a strong, vibrant economy if we don't have a strong, vibrant financial sector.
You know, well put. I wish we had more time to drill down on that. You talk about bad performing foreclosures. Yes. Certainly in North Carolina, but South Carolina, the foreclosure rate was abysmal.
Right.
Well, it actually was pretty good in that it kept going up.
Yeah. The problems with, once again, these are going to be very interesting times to forecast, so good luck to all of us, because the signals are so mixed. At the same time the foreclosure rate is going up in South Carolina, the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, which has a leading index of state behavior, puts South Carolina as one of the next 6 months fastest growing states in the nation. Also Michigan, so I'm not too sure how that fits. But I think
it's a low base.
It's a low base. That's exactly what it is.
Michigan's a much lower base.
That's right.
But there's some positive numbers there that say things are going to grow for us. At the same time, we're getting these other negative signs. But I think we pretty much understand now, housing market and automobile market is not going to lead us into a recovery in this decade.
Unlike North Carolina, which has done a really bad job in terms of getting jobs back from the recession. I mean, North Carolina has 323,000 jobs lost, barely got 20,000 of those back. In South Carolina, you lost about half that many jobs, about 150,000. Right. Smaller state, obviously, but you've already got back about 20,000 of them. Right. So you're not doing as well as, say, the nation is in terms of job creation, but you're doing a lot better than North Carolina is in terms of job creation during the last 2 years.
Right. And our prospects are good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Scott, were you going to say something?
No, I said last year we had about 12,000 jobs, which is good, but it's about half of what we're adding in normal time. So we're off the pace of rapid growth, but we're adding jobs, not subtracting.
You know, guys, we talked a little bit about the European contagion and the opera in Greek and Italy, and the dramatic issues going on over there. How much of a problem could this become in 2012?
Beware of Greeks receiving gifts. That's the problem, because it could be a big problem. And the problem, once
big
again,
enough to derail the domestic economy.
Yes, I think the problem is it's so complex. The complexity of the financial structure has made it impossible to figure out where this is going to go.
Okay, well, and let me hold on just a second, John. Let me say it this way. We all expected in 2009, 2010 that following the 2008 evisceration of the financial services, that those loans in commercial real estate were going to come to roost, and those banks, lo and behold, they're going to all crash. We didn't see that. They're still carrying. They're figuring out how to carry that. So what happens here? We're looking so closely that it's not going to happen.
Here's the problem in Greece and Italy. It's very easy to see, not so much in Greece, but with Italy, it's very easy to see how they could get out of the problem if their economy could grow. But they're still not growing. Greece is declining, and it's declining successively every year. So, I mean, that's a lost case. I mean, they're going to default. It's just a question of how big how much hair is taken off. It's the size of the haircut. That's not critical. It's Italy that's critical. And the problem with Italy is it just doesn't seem to be able to get its economy growing. That's the only way it's going to get out of this mess. And right now, it looks like they grew about 1% in 2011. Maybe 2012, the forecast is it'll actually decline, because the general forecast for Europe is for a recession in 2012, and as a result of that, they're not going to be able to grow their way out of this mess. It's the same thing in this country. We talk about the deficit here. The easiest way to grow out of this, to fix this deficit, is to get the economy growing. We can't seem to figure out how to do it. Instead of doing positive things, we're putting anchors around it, trying to slow it down. For some reason, I can't quite figure out. But in Italy, it's worse.
Kind of the best case scenario for the U.S. is that Europe only goes into a recession, and that cuts into our exports. Worst case scenario, next best case scenario is you see large defaults or write-downs on Italian debt, because there's a lot of Italian debt out there. And then you worry about the capital holes created in the banks across Europe and what the U.S. exposure is to those. And then you worry about the financial contagion happening after that, which would be more than just exports. Again, it would tighten up financial markets. And then there's the doomsday case, in which countries have to leave the euro or the euro falls apart. And I haven't read any good analysis or been able to pen it down myself of the economic impact that doomsday scenario would have.
Don't you expect, and we got about 2 minutes left, don't you expect, Harry, that the EU and all of those countries that have a vested interest will come together at some point and come up with a solution?
Well, only if the French and the Germans can shove it down everybody else's throat. What they've done is they've worked out an agreement in broad general brushstrokes, that what they can't do is deal with the specifics of the problem. They can't deal with large deficits being piled up in each of the countries.
Because of the sovereign nation?
Exactly.
Yeah,
so broad general agreements don't have any, that's a Band-Aid. It's not doing any good. They're still going to go through defaults. Italy's a huge economy. I think it's 8th largest in the world. I believe that's right. It'll impact North Carolina negatively. We're a large manufacturing state. So our manufactured products that go to Europe, that's going to go down as they have a recession or slip into recession this year, or in 2012. So it will impact us negatively for sure, what's going on.
We got about 30 seconds left. Frank, give us some good news out of this.
PGA, Charleston, 2012. So the good news is we're going to have, the Boeing effect has actually come to fruition. We've got jobs online. Not as great as everyone had hoped, but we forgot BMW took a long time. But we have sectors in South Carolina, notwithstanding what's happening in Europe, because we're a heavy manufacturing state also. Manufacturing is picking up. Hospitality and tourism is clearly picking up. And so those are the bright sectors, and I think those will look pretty good for the next year also.
Okay. Thank you for, thanks guys for being here again. Always good to have you. Frank, welcome from Charleston. And I just got to say something special about Harry, because we've been trying to convince him to come back for at least 2 or 3 years.
It's been a while.
Thanks for coming down from the mountain at App State.
No, thank you for having me.
It's always good to have you.
Good to see you, Chris.
And Scott, good to have you back.
you.
John? What can I say?
What can you say?
Thank you for being here. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, gentlemen.
Merry
Until
Christmas.
next week, good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte, enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, who's responsible for rising healthcare costs. Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health is a not-for-profit group of hospitals and medical clinics caring for surrounding communities. Their nurses, physicians, and staff are nationally recognized for their remarkable devotion to patient care. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.